Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On this week's program, we are joined by recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine. But before that, let's get started, as we always do, with a few of my thoughts. Okay, we all know recruiting is on the front burner this month for Jim Harbaugh and his staff, but in many ways it has been overshadowed by the Dr. Anderson story. There is so much going on with that situation that it's really mind-boggling. The Michigan football family seems split on what should be done next. The victims are rightfully asking for more than an apology, while Bo's family members and a growing number of players are speaking up to say they just don't believe Bo knew exactly what was going on. And I'm sure many of you fall on both sides of this issue too. It is tragic, and people's lives have been scarred. We must acknowledge that. What to do next is the question the Michigan administration is pondering now. And I'm not a fan of rushing to judgment on something as serious as this, and I truly hope all parties involved in this discussion search for a resolution that brings healing and truth to this tragic chapter in the history of Michigan athletics. To that end, we hope to be back next week with Shemy Schembechler. He has been very vocal, as you know, in how he feels about what's happening, and has been a frequent guest on this show, so hopefully we can find a few minutes next week to sit down and get his thoughts on what's happening. For today at least, we turn our attention to Michigan football recruiting. June is a huge month for satellite camps and visits on campus. As we get this show finished, it's Victor's weekend here in Ann Arbor, and some big-time talent is on campus for the day. My guest says it's a great opportunity for this young staff to put their stamp on the class of 2022. Up next is the outstanding recruiting writer, EJ Holland, from the Wolverine Magazine, on this week's edition of The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our game day segment to talk recruiting for the month of June, and what is going to be a very big month for that, is recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine. Once again, EJ, great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, right now, this year, we're getting to enjoy something we really didn't last year, which is all of the visits and the satellite camps. So very exciting for the many that follow the recruiting scene like you. We expected June would be a very busy month on the recruiting scene, and it has been. The satellite and other camps, they are in full swing, and you've been able to get to some of those, haven't you, EJ?
Yeah, I've been to basically almost every camp that Jim Harbaugh has been to. He's been able to do twice in one day that I haven't been able to, since I don't have a private jet. I have been able to get to most of the camps he's been at. They actually started off with satellite camp in Memphis to kick off the month of June. They went out there to see commit Cody Jones and five-star defensive tackle target Walter Nolan. So went out there. They've also been, in their own backyard. They went out to Big Rapids for a satellite camp at Ferris State. They came to, my city here in Chicago and had a satellite camp here. They just recently had one in Nashville that I was at as well. So I feel like I'm missing one. But yeah, I've been kind of following around Jim Harbaugh and his adventures on the satellite camp circuit, and the staff has been around as well. They've kind of divvied up time. They've had a couple of other satellite camps in the actual state of Michigan. They had one with Wayne State. They had one at Eastern Michigan. They had a couple down in Georgia. Ron Bellamy and Steve Clinkscale went out to Miami for a camp with Florida International, so technically Fort Lauderdale. So they were down there. They had a couple of camps out in California. This weekend, Harbaugh was in Utah before making his way to Nashville. So, yeah, they've been kind of hitting satellite camps across the country. It's been really fun to follow.
Well, I know last year we had none of the satellite camps, but in reading your coverage and other recruiting analysts, we're seeing it seems to me, unless we just didn't pay attention on our end to this in previous years, an emphasis or a re-emphasis on Michigan again, on the state of Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, staff has a lot of ties to the state of Michigan. It was a big priority for Jim Harbaugh to fix what was kind of not necessarily broken, but a little damaged. One of the big priorities this offseason when making hires for the new staff was repairing relationships and mending fences and having guys that could keep the top talent in Michigan at home. If the best players in Michigan really do play at Michigan, you need to land the highest rated of them all. So I think that Jim Harbaugh made it a point by bringing in guys like Ron Bellamy, former Wolverine and obviously former high school head coach at West Bloomfield, just won a state championship in January. Even though he's not a Michigan native, he is kind of, as some key figures have put it, an adopted son of the city of Detroit. And so I think that a lot of high school coaches in the area really, really respect him. And he's a guy that can basically just connect with anybody. Everybody loves Ron Bellamy. So he was a huge hire on that part. Mike Hart, another ex-Wolverine, also not a Michigan native, but just a guy that has built a lot of great relationships in the state of Michigan, specifically the city of Detroit. He recruited the city hard when he was at Indiana. He's obviously Michigan's all-time leading rusher and just very, very well respected as well. And then you have Steve Clinkscale. Obviously, Michigan hired Mo Linguist at the start, and he bolted to Buffalo to take the head coaching job there. But Harbaugh did a tremendous job of hiring Klink, and he made the best hire possible. Not only is he a great developer of talent, he's also been considered one of the best recruiters in the city of Detroit over the last couple of cycles, bringing in guys like Justin Rogers and Matt Pearson over to Kentucky. So now he'll have an opportunity to keep guys home at Michigan. And, yeah, they even had a big event earlier this month, Detroit Day, where they brought in a ton of in-state targets, including commit Will Johnson, key target Dylan Tatum, top 2023 quarterback Dante Moore, etc. They had a lot of guys on campus. I've talked to some key head coaches in the area, like Coach Grice at West Bloomfield, who's raved about the program, Thomas Wilcher at Cass Tech, who is a former Wolverine himself, who's very excited about the hires. And so the next step is just, as Wilcher put it, getting results on the field.
Well, it's great reading about the satellite camps and, not only the attention we're paying here in the state of Michigan, but elsewhere. But as you know, a lot of Michigan alums and a large fan base is in just south of us in the state of Ohio. And a lot of my listeners are from Ohio that are Michigan fans. And they are always asking me, with this new staff, is there going to be a push back into Ohio or more satellite camps attended? Is that something you have heard anything about?
Yeah, so I know Michigan is planning to have a satellite camp in Ohio before the end of the month. Look, the Ohio conundrum, I guess, is just a little difficult to answer because you have the obvious machine that is Ohio State, and Ohio State is cleaning up with guys they want in Ohio. It's not a secret that Ohio State can keep who they want at home. I mean, they're, competing for national championships every year. They're in the college football playoff. They're winning Big Ten titles. And so it is what it is right now. I mean, they're getting guys they want in Ohio. At the same time, obviously, the state of Ohio has a lot of talent. It's one of the best high school football playing states in the country. And so there's still enough talent to go around. I think you can, get guys that are a little bit outside of Ohio State country. So, for example, Michigan went out to the Dayton area and landed Rod Moore last cycle. So, yeah, I think that Michigan will have more of an emphasis on Ohio, a little bit more, but I think you have to temper your expectations and realize, look, Michigan's not going to get these top 100 kids out of Ohio right now. It's not going to work. If Ohio State wants a kid, they're more than likely going to get a kid. It's just the landscape of it right now. And I know that's not exactly what Michigan fans want to hear, But that is the state of recruiting right now. Now, Michigan can change that with results on the field. But right now, I think, they are going to recruit some more Ohio guys. It's just going to be more guys that are, borderline 4-star prospects, guys that are high 3-star prospects with potential like Rod Moore, guys that have a chip on their shoulder and want to beat Ohio State. And I think that can obviously always help the locker room.
Well, along with the camps, it's a big month for official visits, too. Can you talk about some of the high-profile kids that have been on campus so far in the last couple of weeks?
Official visitors, that guys that have been on campus here recently for OVs, we'll go ahead and start off with Will Johnson, 5-star cornerback commit. Will took an official visit to USC. He's been on 2 unofficial visits to Michigan. He will be back for an official visit to Michigan this weekend. So 3 times seeing Michigan, 1 seeing USC. The Trojans are really making a strong push to flip him. I don't think there's too much to worry about right now. He's a legacy recruit. His father, Deion Johnson, is an ex-Wolverine. Mm-hmm. He's happy with his commitment. He just wants to, he's a 5-star guy. He wants to have a backup plan. He wants to be, he wants to make business decisions. And so in case, things go awry this season, which isn't out of the realm of possibilities, he has something in place. But I think Michigan fans don't have a lot of reason to worry. Again, he's been on campus 3 times, or will be on campus 3 times by the time we finish, recording this show. So he's been on campus, keeping him as a top priority. Steve Clinkscale actually was the first Power 5 coach to offer him. So even though Mo Linguist bolted, there's still familiarity there. He has great relationships, with guys like Ron Bellamy and Jim Harbaugh himself. So, getting him on campus as much as possible is obviously a plus. 4-star quarterback Miles Pollard was a huge visitor earlier this month. He's coming off his official visit. I think Michigan is in the lead there. He's from Brentwood, Ravenwood, down in the Nashville area, same school that produced Junior Colson last cycle, so he has a tie there. He's good friends with Will Johnson, who I just mentioned. Steve Clinkscale recruited him hard at Kentucky for multiple years, so there's a strong relationship there. Even though he has the offers from some big schools down south like Auburn and Oklahoma, which are set to host him for official visits later this month, I feel like Michigan has the edge, and they got some more face time with him at the satellite camp in Nashville. Nate Johnson has been a top quarterback target for the Wolverines this cycle. He runs a 10.5 100-meter, so he's extremely fast, one of the fastest players in the country, regardless of position. He has a great relationship with Matt Weiss. He likes the fact that Jim Harbaugh helped identify him early on, and he also loves the fact that Weiss worked with Lamar Jackson during his time with the Baltimore Ravens, and that's definitely appealing. They've showed him kind of how they would use him at Michigan and how he compares to Lamar Jackson. He just picked up an offer from UCLA, so that's going to be something to watch with Michigan in a really good spot with Nate Johnson, who just qualified for the Elite 11 finals. Michigan had their top tight end target on campus earlier this week, Rivals 250 tight end Oscar Delp out of Georgia. Michigan was the first school to offer Delp, so that always is going to have Michigan holding a special place in his heart. I think they made a really strong impression on his visit. Georgia's going to be tough. The Bulldogs are really making a big push to keep him at home, but he has great relationships with the Michigan staff, and Michigan remains a dark horse in that recruitment. And then you had some intriguing, more, 3-star type of guys like Jeremy Patton from small town Tenaha, Texas, who is very high on Michigan and is a potential steal from the Lone Star State. You had guys like Micah Pollard from the Jacksonville area, pass rusher, a guy that can play multiple linebacker spots that Michigan really loves. He's actually the nephew of Michigan great Braylon Edwards. Mm-hmm. So Micah Pollard, again, a 3-star linebacker out of Jacksonville. I think Michigan is in a really good spot with him. And they had George Fitzpatrick, who's actually a 4-star offensive lineman out of the Denver area come in. He's very, very high on the offensive line board, and a few others. So those are some of the official visitors they've had on campus. And then this weekend they go into Victor's weekend, which is loaded with a ton of key targets like five-star defensive tackle Walter Nolan. You have Will Johnson coming back. Basically all the commits will be on campus. You have Rivals 250 defensive lineman Justice Finkley coming in. Rivals 250 offensive lineman Lucas Ayer coming in. Four-star defensive lineman Mario Eugenio. You have some key unofficial visitors coming in like four-star defensive back Dylan Tatum, four-star defensive tackle Deion Walker out of Tech. So a lot of top talent will be at Michigan this weekend for Victor's weekend.
Well, there are a lot of other kids in the 2022 process that we're still in on. And I just wanted to go over a few of these names because I've seen them as trending up or maybe popping up more on Michigan's radar recently. We talked about Nate Johnson, who's really on the way up. Another kid we're hearing about is a three-star running back CJ Stokes from Columbia, South Carolina. And he was, I think earlier in the process, he was thought to be somewhat of a lock for the Gamecocks. But is that changing, EJ?
Stokes is actually one of three running backs coming in for official visits. I think the other two are actually higher on the board. George Pettaway out of Virginia, Dylan Bell out of Texas. But I think CJ Stokes is definitely a possibility to end up in this class. One, it depends how hard Michigan pushes with Bell and Pettaway also coming in this weekend. And two, I also think it depends on how hard South Carolina pushes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Gamecocks are necessarily making him a top priority right now, so the door is open for Michigan to close with him if they want to close with him, or if they want to wait it out and see if they can land Pettaway or Bell. I think, it really depends on the strategy that Michigan takes. So there's just so many moving parts with Stokes. Again, it just depends on if Michigan, wants to make the big push this weekend. And if they do, I do think they can land him. But it just, depends on, if South Carolina makes a push, if Michigan makes a push, just so much going on with him, especially with two other running backs joining him for official visits this weekend.
Most teams, including Michigan, are always on the lookout for the big, rangy wide receivers. Another kid that I'm reading about is C.J. Smith from Orlando Bishop Moore, who has been on Michigan's radar for a while. Big kid, 6'3", 185, and from everything I read, he's got some wheels too.
Yeah, he does. He, I believe, ran a 10.4 100 meter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was an insane time. It caught a lot of people's attention. Unfortunately, for Michigan, that attention has dropped the Wolverine stock in that recruitment. He is no longer slated to make an official visit next weekend, and so I expect him to stay south.
Well, another wide receiver, and this sort of has surprised me. We haven't really been back down in Alabama, it seems, in the last few years. There's a kid that it looks like would fit nicely from Pinson, Alabama, in Josh Gaddis's offense, wide receiver, and I'm not sure what the kid's name is. I didn't write it down.
Marquarius White.
Yes.
Yeah, so Marquarius White is a prospect that Michigan can definitely land. We haven't talked a lot about him. He's about 5'10", 170 pounds, so he has the speed. A guy that can play in the slot, in the outside. Really keeps to himself, quiet kid. Right now, even though he has the big offers on his profile, I don't think schools like Alabama or Ole Miss or other SEC schools that have offered are necessarily making him a top priority. And so, again, the door is wide open for Michigan to land him. They are getting him on campus for an official visit next weekend. Josh Gaddis recruited the state of Alabama during his time with Alabama. New director of recruiting, Sean Larkins, has been leading a big charge in the state of Alabama. He recruited there during his stops down south. So Michigan in a prime position there. The only other two schools that White has officially visited are Louisville and Virginia Tech. So I think Michigan doesn't have too much to fear in terms of competition, more so saying that they're not really battling the big Southern powers for a kid out of Alabama.
Another kid whose stock is trending up nationally is defensive end Bo Atkinson. He's from Raleigh, North Carolina. Am I correct that he is at the top of Michigan's defensive line board right now?
He was a top priority, yes, but Bo just committed to North Carolina, so probably not going to see much positive movement there. Going to be tough to flip considering he's a North Carolina kid.
Okay, so an outside linebacker who seems to be listening to Michigan's pitch right now is Ankle Saka. He's from Towson, Maryland, and from what I understand, he's being recruited by several Big Ten schools right now, EJ.
Yeah, he is. So Penn State, Northwestern, Michigan are the three Big Ten schools that are very involved. He also made an official visit to USC, so they're kind of the outlier out west that's recruiting him. But he's another kid that Michigan can definitely land. I think, Penn State is going to be tough to beat, but Michigan gets the last official visit, and I think that they've done a really, really good job recruiting him. Ryan Osborne, Michigan's new defensive analyst, has really honed in on edge rushers and is really leading the way with Saka. So he fits the mold of what they like. They're not necessarily going after those super tall 6'4", 6'5", long guys coming off the edge. They like more compact guys, more 6'2", 6'3" guys, and Saka fits that mold. He actually reminds me a little bit of a guy that I used to cover named Joseph Asai, who played at the University of Texas and was just drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. So I really like him. I think he's kind of undervalued, just got bumped up in the rankings, though. And, again, Michigan in a good spot to land him depending on how the official visit goes next weekend.
Are there any other names that you could mention that are not only trending up nationally, but are now on Michigan's board?
Yeah, I think some newer targets that are trending up. Three-star offensive lineman Alessandro Lorenzetti. He plays at a boarding school in Connecticut, but is actually from Montreal, Canada. Alessandro is considered a Michigan State lean, but he actually picked up a Michigan offer while on an unofficial visit this week and will be on campus for an official visit this weekend. So I think Michigan has a chance to leapfrog rival Michigan State. Diarco Perkins McAllister, four-star safety out of the Nashville area. Michigan spent a lot of time with him at the satellite camp this week. He has a pre-existing relationship with Steve Clinkscale, who recruited him at Kentucky, and that's a big reason he set an official visit with Michigan. So he's a guy that's kind of trending up on the board, and his interest is trending up in Michigan as well. So we'll see how that official visit goes. Michigan's trending up with Austin Brown, a hybrid safety linebacker out of Johnston City, Illinois, which is closer to St. Louis, much closer to St. Louis than it is to Chicago, about a 5-hour drive for me. But he's an intriguing prospect that the Wolverines are making a priority and can potentially close with this weekend. We obviously talked a lot about guys that are coming in this weekend, like Walter Nolan and Mario Eugenio, Joseph Ottedire. So those are some other key targets coming in this weekend that Michigan feels like they're in a good spot with, that they can, make power moves with. Justice Finkley, another one that I mentioned, Dylan Bell, etc. So those guys that I mentioned are kind of newer targets, more guys that I feel like are turning up with. Another one that I'll throw out there is Jaleel Florence out of San Diego Lincoln. Courtney Morgan, Michigan's new director of player personnel, has a lot of West Coast ties and is doing a really, really good job recruiting Florence. He was actually scheduled to come in on June 11th, but moved his official visit to June 25th. I think Michigan can take the lead in his recruitment as well. And another guy they're back in the mix with is a big name, Keon Saab, Rivals 100 safety. We broke the news this week that he's coming in for a midweek official visit next week. So that's definitely something to watch. He was actually considered a Clemson lean, but Clemson just took another safety in Sherrod Kovil. So, the door is back open for Michigan to make a move with Keon Saab. So those are definitely some, guys that Michigan is trending up with.
Well, as we said, this is a huge recruiting weekend, Victor's weekend in Ann Arbor the remainder of June and into July? Do we have anything like this planned?
Obviously, the Victors Weekend is this weekend. June 25th, we'll have some official visitors, like we mentioned, Marquarius White, Anto Saka, Jaleel Florence, Jaleel Tucker, who is another top target coming in from California, Jacoby Albert, who's another kid from Alabama, an intriguing athlete, and maybe a few others will pop up. So that's going to be an organized official visit weekend. And then you're going to have maybe some midweek visitors next week. Like I said, Keon Saab, they're working on locking down a date with Rivals 250 linebacker Sebastian Cheeks. So that's another key target to know that Michigan's really, really prioritizing. So June 25th is going to be the last big official visit weekend, other than, again, some outliers coming in for midweek official visits, and then you enter another dead period. So that's kind of going to hurt July. There isn't really going to be much in terms of organized on-campus or satellite camps or anything, because we are going to enter another dead period.
Well, of the names we've mentioned, EJ, and maybe some we haven't so far, any that you get the inkling are going to be committing in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so one kid we didn't mention or talk about is Aaron Alexander. He's an unranked linebacker out of Belleville. Michigan has had its fair share of issues, I guess, if you want to call them, with Belleville. But I think, again, fences are being mended, and Klinkscale and Bellamy have repaired relationships at Belleville. Aaron Alexander, to talk about him as a prospect, he's unranked. His only other FBS offer is from Marshall. But Michigan really likes his athletic profile. He's a big kid that runs an 11.2 100 meters, so that's very fast for his size. He has experience playing running back. He really impressed them at their on-campus camp last weekend, earned an offer, and I think it could be a quick turnaround. So he's definitely a candidate to be Michigan's next commit.
Earlier in the spring, a lot of us were thinking and talking about the fact that with COVID and not having visits and satellite camps in the last year, that when you got these kids on campus in June, not just Michigan, but all around the college football landscape, you would be getting a lot of very quick commitments from these kids who just are tired of Zoom calls, they're tired of emails and everything else that goes along with the process. It doesn't really seem to have happened that way so far, does it?
No, and I think some of it is these kids have been locked up for so long that they want to take other visits. They don't want to necessarily shut things down and commit right away. They want to see other schools. They want to enjoy other visits. They want to take some unofficial visits. They want to camp. They want to do all the things that comes with the recruiting process that they haven't been able to do, rather than just, committing on the first visit they go to or committing to the school that's at the top of their list. They want to really enjoy being kids, and I think that's completely fair, considering that it's been a year since they've had an opportunity to get on college campuses. So I think, that claim was a little I don't think there was a lot of substance behind it. I think there has been kids that have obviously shut things down and committed this month. But I think a lot of people didn't take into account, look, these kids are going to want to make as many visits as they can during the month of June to make up for the entire year that they've been locked up. So I think maybe July is when you'll start seeing more of a string of commitments, or late June, after most of the kids wrap up their official visit.
Well, as we are all aware as Michigan fans, Jim overhauled the staff in the offseason, and a lot of that was because of recruiting, and then bringing in Courtney Morgan to run that very important piece of the operation. And I know you've only been covering Michigan specifically for the last couple of years, so this might be not a fair question, but what, if any, significant changes have you noticed since this overhaul took place?
Well, yeah, the only recruiting support staff I covered was that of Maddie Dudek, and, there just wasn't a lot of emphasis placed on it. So when I originally came over from the Texas beat, which is a very similar program to Michigan, I was just shocked at how small the recruiting department was. It was like a mom and shop operation where, Texas had a similar mold as Ohio State. And so, I covered Tom Herman at Texas, who was obviously part of the Urban Meyer tree. And so he took exactly what Urban Meyer did at Ohio State and implemented it at Texas. And Ryan Day, who's obviously at Ohio State right now, is following that same model in terms of the recruiting department. So Michigan kind of beefed that up and is following, and now has a recruiting department that closely resembles that of Ohio State and that of Texas and its fellow Blue Bloods. They brought in director of player personnel Courtney Morgan, who has a lot of West Coast ties, an ex-Wolverine, is known as a people's person. They promoted Sean Larkins, who has ties throughout the Southeast, as the director of recruiting. They brought in Christina DeRuiter, who's going to handle on-campus visits. So a lot of what Maddie Dudek did as far as scheduling calls, scheduling visits, making sure guys are having good times on campus as we transition to this name, image, likeness period where college kids are going to have an opportunity to make money. Branding is at the top of the priority list. So Harbaugh brought in, Sydney Sims from Notre Dame to help lead that charge. So a lot of positive, changes have happened within the recruiting department. I think, one, it's bigger, and two, it's more innovative. And I think you're going to see the benefits of it, down the line.
Does it seem to you as if the new coaching staff has made a favorable impression with recruits that you've talked to, and then, other players and high school coaches so far?
Yeah, I think that they definitely have. I think, like I said, Ron Bellamy, Steve Klingscale specifically have a lot of ties in the Detroit Metro, Mike Hart as well. And so all those high school coaches have raved about those hires. Mike McDonald, even though he came from the NFL, has really impressed guys with his football acumen. Same with Matt White, who's a big analytics guy. Both of those, guys have really impressed recruits with their football knowledge and going over the board with them and going through virtual film sessions. So, the recruits have definitely noticed a change in that regard. George Hilo has a lot of connections in the state of Florida, being a Jacksonville native. So I think he'll continue to help Michigan's push there. So there's definitely been a lot of positive reaction. Out west, again, Courtney Morgan has a lot of ties in the state of California. Sean Larkins has been leading the charge in the Southeast, specifically in Alabama. So I think this staff is well connected in a lot of different areas with an emphasis on Michigan's own backyard. And recruits, coaches, parents, trainers are all taking notice of the improved efforts. And you got to keep in mind that, this staff is really, really young. Most of the guys are under the age of 40. And so they're able to connect with kids on a personal level that maybe, older guys like Mike Zordich and Don Brown weren't able to.
Well, I know my listeners and a lot of Michigan fans that I know and talk to were thrilled with the changes, but I wonder, is this class 2022 too soon to expect big results, or will next year's class be the real litmus test as to whether this staff has notched it up?
I think next year will, but you have to keep in mind that a lot will depend on what happens this season. I covered a similar situation where Charlie Strong made a bunch of changes and it didn't work out and he got fired. Tom Herman made a bunch of changes, didn't work out and he got fired. And I'm not saying Michigan's going to go in the same way as Texas. I think a lot of these hires were very, very positive, and Michigan made way more changes than Herman did and than Strong did. So I think you could see it work out for a positive. But the ultimate deciding factor on how this recruiting cycle goes and how next recruiting cycle goes will simply depend on how this season goes. Michigan needs to win. Pressure is at an all-time high, and they absolutely cannot follow in the same pattern as Charlie Strong and Tom Herman did at Texas. They have to win games. They have to exceed expectations. And so, results on the recruiting trail will directly be dependent on results on the field.
Well, final question for you, EJ, before we let you get away. As of now, I think Rivals has us listed as the number 17 class for 2022. 7 commitments, if I'm right. And there's plenty of time, and we've been talking about that. We have a lot of offers out there, a lot of visits yet to be taken. How disappointing, though, would it be if this was not a top 10 class?
I'm not sure if it would be necessarily a disappointment. You kind of have to look at this as more of a little bit more of a transition class, just in the sense that there were so many changes. If you're a safety recruit, for example, right? You've had Bob Shoop as your lead recruiter. Mm-hmm. You've had Sean Larkins as your lead recruiter. You've had George Hilo as your lead recruiter. and now you have Ron Bellamy as your lead recruiter. So you've had 4 lead recruiters in less than a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not necessarily a recipe for success. So there's been so many changes. And at the end of the day, I think Michigan, got it right with the hires in terms of a recruiting perspective. We'll see if they got it right from an on-the-field perspective. But there's been so many changes that it's almost like you went through a coaching change, right? So
Right.
I don't think you necessarily judge this class based on ranking. I think you've got a great start with Will Johnson, and you have some other, top guys committed, or 4-star guys committed, like Tayshaun Trent, Tyler Morris, and some intriguing 3-star prospects like Connor Jones. And we'll just see what happens. I mean, if Michigan has a big season, I think they can land some top targets. If Michigan has a disappointing season, then I'm not so sure we won't see more changes. So I think this is just really more of a transition class from a recruiting perspective.
With us on our game day segment this week has been recruiting editor EJ Holland, recruiting writer, I should say, EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine. And it's going to be a busy month of June the rest of the way. Really, recruiting just never seems. We have the dead periods, but the interest is always there from your readers and my listeners. So, EJ, we look forward to having you back soon, and thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
On Quick Hits today, we'll keep it short. We will have more on recruiting during July, and by that time we could have quite a few more commitments. It's been sort of crazy how these guys are visiting campus and delaying their commitments, but it is understandable. It's the first time they've been able to get out there in over a year, so by July, maybe we'll have a better picture of how the class of 2022 is shaping up. As I mentioned earlier, we are not avoiding the Dr. Anderson story. So next week, I hope to have Shemy Schembechler on with his thoughts on the investigation, what his dad did or didn't know, and much more. In the meantime, I hope you're enjoying this very young summer, even though it's not officially summer yet, and getting out there to enjoy life as things open back up. If we stay on track, and it sure looks like we will, the big house will be rocking with no limitations this fall. We hope anyway. Let's keep our fingers crossed. As I mentioned from time to time, we are on our summer schedule until August, when we resume weekly programming, and that's as we get ready for football season. It's not that far away. So make sure you tell your friends and family about the show. Please like us on Facebook and Twitter, or give us a favorable review wherever you get your podcast from. That does it for now. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!